Functional equivalences. The notion of functional equivalence descends directly from the concept of function. The idea that a political system necessarily fulfills certain fundamental tasks helped functionalists move to an important stage. They have and indeed emphasized with particular clarity first that a different structures may uh, perform the same function, and second the same structure may perform several different functions. The search for functional equivalences passes through this analytical disassociation of roles and functions. The same performance may be accomplished in various countries by different organs, and the similar or comparable institutions may fulfill in various countries different tasks. In some places, a tribe can assume the function of political recruitment that a well organized political party performs elsewhere, but the presence of such a party does not impede other organs from contributing to the recruitment of political elites, as do, for example, unions in Great Britain or Catholic action in Italy. The higher administration not only plays an executive function, it is well known that it also intervenes in the legislative process upstream, although although to varying degree. The intervention is particularly important in France, Austria, Sweden, Norway, Denmark. It is much less so in Belgium, Italy, or Netherlands. Why way of simplification? One could say that the president of French Republic in his role as supreme magistrate fulfills three functions: a symbolic one, which makes him the representative of nation; an executive one, which makes him the chief executive; and partition one, which makes him the leader of majority coalition. One asks who fulfills these three functions in Great Britain. One finds two officials: the monarch for the symbolic function, and the prime minister for the two others. In Italy, these three functions are distributed among three persons: one for the symbolic function, the president of a republic; one for the executive function, the president of a council of ministers; and one for the partition function, the general secretary of dominant Christian Democratic Party. A similar division occurred in Germany in 1974 when Helmut Schmidt succeeded Willy Brandt to the chancellery, leaving Brandt with effective presidency of the Social Democratic Party. Once the comparativist has identified the person who fulfills the various functions, he can tackle the field how large that he wishes to investigate, asking uh, asking questions of systems that are different as Soviet, the Dutch, and the Albanian. For the comparativist, functionalism starts with the each for equivalences, but it is necessary to emphasize here how much this concept is a tributary of functionalist theory and system analysis. Only the universal metrics of political systems, such as Eastern and particular, has imagined it for the study of political phenomena and process, has rendered possible the development of the comparisons in terms of functions. The knowledge of these functions did not exist uh, prior prior to the discovery of allel- allergical system. This fact alone testifies to the usefulness of the theoretical elaboration. Without it, it would have been impossible to construct the marvelous instrument of functional equivalence. No one is obliged to accept the parable of the black box and watch the energy of demands and support is transformed into legislative text. governmental orders or symbols, still everyone would agree that all political systems engender decisions. Who makes them? The parliament, as under the French Third Republic Party, headquarters as in Italy, military nucleus as in Argentina, the high bureaucracy as in Austria at the time of Habsburgs, powerful groups like Opus Dei in Spain under Franco, a tyrant like Idi Amin Dada in Uganda, a dictator resting on solid party, or the crowds in street as in revolutionary St. Petersburg or Tehran. To identify these organs across a diversity of situations is a primary duty for the comparativist. Indeed, while locating the site where political decisions are made, the comparativist will not only differentiate between the various political systems but also bring to light the specific, specificity of certain problems. La Plombiera stressed in his introduction to the bureaucracy and political development that a seizure of power by bureaucracy brings about the significant consequences. Its intrusion signifies that decisions will be taken according to process marked as much by obscurity as by expertise. Furthermore, its growth may also represent a serious obstacles to the development of an autonomous political authority. In this example, we see how the functional perspective can uh, elucidate even the history of political institutions. One could make the same observations about the communication, the existence of a network of mass communication, as Daniel Lerner showed in the passing of traditional society naturally brings about the political process that are very different from those engendered by the old mediate and fragmented system of oral communication. It is true that in both cases functions of communications are fulfilled, but they are performed so differently that the political scientist has explained to come to explain on the basis a part of enormous contrast that exists between political systems and the age of audiovisual media and those that rely on mouth to ear realize. This observation brings us to the question of the nature of equivalence, which should never be confused with similarity. Most vital functions of a political system can be treated in same ways. Socialization, for instance, may be fulfilled by the family, church, the public school, or political youth organization, and to these different patterns will correspond different political consequences. Comparing as a functionalist has the advantage of getting rid of misleading labels. Comparing White House of and Whitehall, Richard E. suggests that the American and British machines are not at opposite poles, but rather near the center of a spectrum, stretching between ideal types from collective leadership to one-man rule. But the similarities between the two systems are not to be detected by the conventional comparison. We Americans have counterparts for their top civil servants, but not in our own civil service. We have counterparts of their cabinet ministers, but not exclusively or even mainly in our cabinet. We make ourselves much trouble analytically by letting nomenclature dictate our analogies. Functional equivalence is not a trivial equivalence. It implies conceptualization. That is to say, it appears only alter an in-depth analysis of the political process. Who articulate demands in Poland and Italy? By what channels is information transmitted? How much independence is enjoyed by the courts or the socializing agencies? Functional equivalence allows for a comparison that automatically sheds light on the manner in which the political system functions in general and in its various sectors. The conceptual matrix calls for the generalizations because each function is conceived of as a part of a living complex. Even the most empirically oriented research eventually nourishes the theoretical framework. Among the universal and fundamental function to is no particular attract the attention of the comparativist interested in a great variety of political systems because they permit a significant or differentiations between them. They are I the particulation of interest, which consists of the translation of diffuse interest into the explicit demand, claims, petition, proposals, amendments. The aggregation of interest, which consists of the converting these demands into global and coherent alternatives, party programs, congress, congressional platforms, parliamentary majority. For example, the interest of the wine growers from southern France or those of metal workers can be expressed by organized associations such as unions or by more spontaneous groups that will block highways, damage official buildings, or demonstrate in order to arouse public opinion. These interests can also reach the ears of those in power by more diffuse means, by mass media, or even by direct contact. One articulated, the interests need to be aggregated, that is, integrated or included in wider programs capable of winning a majority with various ideas. Compatible goals. The institution or organizations that fulfill this aggregating functions could be unions at national or regional levels, political parties or a coalition of parties, or some co- conciliatory committee. Let us imagine in various countries interests are already articulated by feminist, ecologist, consumer movements. These interests will not be integrated in the same manner in a multi-party system and two-party system or in one dominant party system. In first case, several majorities are possible simultaneously according to whether the issues of the day concern foreign policy or legislation or on worth control, taxation, employment, and so on. Usually, a party will have to take the initiative in defending this or that particular interest, but its minority position will oblique to find allies through a series of negotiations and compromise. The process of interest aggregation will find its final stage in the parliament or during negotiations among leaders of the parties or parties representing a virtual majority in a two-party system. On the contrary, the site of aggregation will normally be the leadership of the party in power after debates and even fights among factions. In one dominant party system, the aggregation is still fulfilled within the party, but sometimes external interventions such as those by higher administration on the church or the army make themselves strongly felt. This happened, for example, Franco's Spain. And political regime with strong personalized power, it may be the leader himself who reconcile divergent interests. That it to say that according to the context, the same function could be fulfilled by the structures as specialized as parties, unions, parliaments, and so forth. Whereas elsewhere it could fall to the hands of a single man or to his immediate encouraged according to ethnic, tribal, or familial ramifications. Functional equivalences are most useful when we consider highly contrasting countries. Highly contrasting countries. Functionalists have, in fact, purposefully designed to make possible comparison between two countries when one is structured in an embryonic way and other has reached a high level of structural differentiation. For example, it would be easier to compare Germany or Australia without the concept of functional equivalence than it would be to compare Indonesia and Canada. Necessarily, the more a system develops, the more it becomes differentiated. The specializations of structures tend to grow until each particular function is performed by a specific institution. It is incumbent upon the comparativists to bring to light the way in which various specialized political agencies have historically crystallized executive powers, legislatures, bureaucrats, courts, and to indicate which different functions could be fulfilled by similar structures in various historical, cultural, systematic context. The function of mobilizations, for instance, frequently escape the central political structures. It is well known that these roles may be played by institutions outside the political sphere, such as regions. When we think of Hustis in the past, or more recently, atoll Atollahs. Newspapers of the name of Al Haram should suffice. Universities from Al Azhar and Cairo to Tehran, unions, the army, or even sport associations. In the same way, it could be admitted to that no one institution is limited to a single function. A union, for instance, may depart from its normal role uh, to articulate to articulate a specific interest in order to become the representative and symbol of entire population, as happened in Poland in 1982. These substitutions occur with particular frequency and certain specific situations. A fascinating task for comparativists would consist in pinpointing the link that exists between the various contexts and the probability of such substitutions. When the English dissolved the party of Kenyatta in 1955, the trade union of Tom Mboya took up the banner. Similarly, in Algeria and Cameroon, the union becomes the flagship of nationalist claims at the moment when French authorities forward their political expressions. Regional religious organizations may compare with political channels everywhere. Nevertheless, a Guy Hermit noted the political presence and activity of hierarchy and clergy and organized Catholic militant are notable, specifically in regions characterized at the same time by an authoritarian exercise of power and by the incapacity or refusal to implement a sufficient and generalized participation of citizens in the political system. In these countries, religious organizations are the only ones capable of offering host structures, leadership, and means of expression distinct from those controlled by the power or dominating oligarchy. The political role of religious organizations seems thus to correspond to a particular systematic situation. In the same way, in particular setting of Eastern Europe, discontent is manifested through various specific channels which have been well analyzed by G. UNESCO. It is expressed through magazines and intellectual circles as in Czechoslovakia during the Prague Spring, in the university in Budapest in 1950s, around religious leaders, and not only in Holland and Hungary through the army, which is often less subservient to Moscow, and then the party around factions, particularly when the classic opposition crystallized between dogmatics and Moscovites and revisionists and nationalists, or around strong personalities. The significance of functional equivalences may vary not only according to the distance existing between the countries compared, but also in relation to the place and importance of the observed function within the political system. To pose the equivalence of the modernizing Borges in the 19th century Europe, where the bureaucracy is studied by Eisenstadt, or with the army and certain third world notions, and certainly more difficult than to note equivalence between the Secretary of State in France and the senior minister outside the cabinet of Great Britain. On the other hand, the search for equivalence should not be limited to the most of important function. It could be enlightening. For instance, to consider primary election in US as comprising a function similar to the first round in French elections. In the same way, it would be possible to see in the practice of survey as introduced in Great Britain an equivalent to first electoral round. If one fails to reconsider these equivalents, one comprehend neither how electoral behavior are formed nor how the selection of the political leaders is accomplished. The utility of the concept of the functional equivalence is obvious, but its empirical application is sometimes difficult. The idea theoretically precious. The certain vital functions are fulfilled everywhere has certainly helped the comparativists in perceiving the importance of certain structures and discovering their hidden tasks and their secondary roles. At the same time, certain shortcomings should be mentioned. It is not certain, in fact, that all the functions considered crucial to the existence of the political system are really performed everywhere. Obviously, it will always be possible to maintain that interests all over the world are necessarily filtered, articulated, and aggregated. But how far can we go in this direction? What interests really exist in the Ammonite and or Afghan political arena? It would certainly be fruitful to trace a parallel between the electoral participation of, say, the English or Dutch citizen and that more symbolic of Argentine decamisado Algerian Felaha. These kinds of comparisons would lead the researcher to reconsider the significance of electra elector act in the context of true polyarchies and to point out, for example, its universal symbolic dimension, but one will discover grand truths. Why advancing very far along this route. As noted, Giovanni Sartori has contested the utility of applying such concepts as participations to system in which it is practiced in such a formal ways. An evident risk of use of functionalism would be the dilution of concept which might lose their analytical powers as effort are made to have them over the greatest variety of political regimes.